Okay, I'm going to try to describe a basic color loop sock. I'm just going to draw a little foot here, not very good. So my basic color loop sock has a contrast color cuff and then color loops every 8 stitches that I knit with vertically until the loop runs out. Then any kind of heel, I should do that in the main color, any kind of heel, and then any kind of length of foot, and then any kind of toe. So that's a basic color loop sock. It's a vanilla sock, except the color loops, so I would switch to main color to knit with here. That's a terrible arrow. Okay, so I would start knitting here with the main color. Maybe I would come back and do the contrast color in the heels and toes again, but it depends how much yarn I'm working with. So that's a basic color loop sock. It's a vanilla sock, except some sort of vertical patterning with a color loop. And the color loops, once you measure them, they all act independently. And that way, it sort of doesn't matter where they end. Maybe this one is a row after this one. But if you measure them with a ruler, then usually they're within 1 to 2 rows apart from each other. So the color loop pattern that I'm going to demonstrate has the color loops starting and then the 2 strands working away from each other for 2 rows, then coming back for 2 rows, then apart for 2 rows. I'm not saying that very well. So, and I believe there's enough for 4 diamonds. And it ends up making a diamond form. And then you knit until the color loop ends. So that color loop does that, whereas this color loop meets it. They never cross, they act independently. Oh, this is terrible. But you get the idea. So they look like they're working together, but they're actually separate. And I do that all the way around the sock for this example. So how do I do that? We've got the sound of the rain on the roof, but I'm not going to let that stop me from recording because it's actually a perfect atmosphere for talking about making color loop socks. And I wanted to cover overview the basic concept of the most simple form of color loop socks, which is, this was one of the first socks that I ever made. And it's a color loop made with the cuff yarn every 8 stitches, and then switching to working with the main color, but knitting with those loops every time I come to them. Just 1 stitch with the 2 strands of the loop knit together, so that gives it just a little extra little thickness there. So you knit the leg down until the color loops are all used up, and then they're gone, and the last stitch is knit. No ends to weave in, and then you knit your favorite heel, your foot, your toe, and you're done. Basic sock. This sock was also knit every 8 stitches the color loop made. This time in different colors, and this time also the color loops were purled. There are so many things you can do with color loops. But the same idea. I worked the color loops till they were done, then I did my favorite heel, the foot and the toe. Otherwise it's a vanilla sock. This was one of the first socks that I started doing a pre-heel, which I called an ankle snug, because I didn't like the baggy ankles of a straight leg. These color loops also play with different lengths. So the front of the leg had longer color loops than the back of the leg, so that I could start my pre-heel. But the same idea, I used the color loop to determine what the rest of the sock was going to be. As soon as I finished the back of the leg color loops, I started my pre-heel, and as soon as I finished the front of the leg color loops, I started the heel proper, and then finished the foot and toe. Now that said, there is no reason why you can't have color loops that go all the way down, and I do have many designs that do use that. You just pause to do your heel, and then you resume the instep stitches and continue with the color loops. But for the most basic color loop sock, you're going to use a contrast color somewhere. You could make your contrast color with your cuff and then make your contrast color loops, or you can do main color with the cuff and just do one row of your contrast color and create your color loops. And that uses much less yarn. So if you have a really special yarn, but you want to use every last bit of it, maybe make some color loop socks. So that's the overview of the color loop, basic color loop sock. Just briefly describing the process. After knitting a cuff, I want to make 8 color loops spaced every 8 stitches, or 9 color loops spaced every 8 stitches for a 72 stitch or a 64 stitch sock. So it's 8 times something, because every 8 stitches you're going to do a color loop. So 8 times 8 for a 64 stitch, or 8 times 9 for a 72 stitch sock. So it's just a nice way to space the color loops. And for this example sock, those 8 stitches end up those 8 stitches mean that you can have a color loop stitch, sort of just follow a grid, make this basic pattern. Wait, did I do something wrong here? So it goes over, the color loop is worked straight down vertically, then moves over 1 for 3 rows, then stays straight for 1 more row, and then moves over again. There was my mistake. Sorry about that. So the repeat is this box over and over again, because this is exactly where you started. So for this sock, you would do this repeat 4 times for a 4-foot long color loop. Okay? after those 4 repeats are done, you just continue going straight. I'm not right-handed, sorry. Until the color loop ends. And that is a safe way to do this basic pattern. And it'll give you that diamond motif. So I hope that's helpful. It is easy to make the color loops. You're knitting along, and then it's time for a color loop. So you measure 4 feet, then you pinch it at the bottom. Well, you pinch it, and then you continue knitting with that pinch. So your color loop hangs in between these 2 stitches, right? So these are going to be the first 2 stitches. The next row I will do the second 2 stitches of that motif, and then the color loop starts moving over. And it works its way away. And then it comes back together again, and then four times, and then on the 4th time it just goes parallel, like I showed on the graph version. So the only confusing thing making your color loops is that once you've made that first color loop, you count that as 1, and you do 8 more stitches, and then your next stitch wants to be a 1 again, so you make another color loop, and then that's 1. So I hope that helps. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions about the making of the color loops, or the knitting with the color loops, or anything. Let's see how that goes. Okay, I hope this angle works well enough to see. I have continued knitting with the color loops, and as you can see, hopefully, there's just a little bit hanging from some of them, and let's see, there. This one I would call finished. It's just a little tiny little bit of wiggle room there. Not super tight though. So I was going to do this final round for, well, maybe one of them has one more round beyond. Not all of them have to end in the exact same row. They act independently. And I don't think visually that ruins a sock to have one row different ending point. But here I am with just a teeny bit of wiggle room, and if I left it as is, these stitches would be a little distorted because there would be just too much space if I just knit to end. So what I'd like to show you is I will knit with my main color into that loop, and the stitch is too big. But on the next one, I'm going to trap the end of the loop instead of knitting with it, because I don't, let's see, I do have enough to knit with it. So I'll just knit with this one. And it will end with one stitch, just to be nice and snug there, because you want your last stitch to be snug. And I can take out the stitch marker at any point now. I could wait till finishing the sock even, but I'll take it out now. So that loop is finished. No ends to weave in. Let's see what happens for the next loop. I have 6 stitches in between each loop, and then 2 stitches of the color loop to work with. So I can either knit the last 2 stitches 1 and 1 and be done, or if I only have a little bit left, then just 1, or if I have even less. See, this is not enough to pull up at all over the needle, so this is done as is with 2 stitches. Done. Okay, so let's see what happens with the next one. So I've removed a couple of the stitch markers, but I left a few to show that some are pretty snug. I've knit a few rows past the ending of when I stitched them, but I'm at one now with just a little bit of wiggle room. So I'm going to show you how I trap that stitch just to make sure it stays tight. So I have just too little to grab with my finger, so it's very good that I have the stitch marker here. I'm going to bring that loop up over the stitch, over the right needle. Make sure that the stitch marker is hanging from the left side. With my working yarn, wrap as normal. Then take the stitch marker, lift it back up over the edge of the needle, trapping the end of the loop over my working yarn. When I knit with that, completing the stitch, the loop is trapped on the stitch that is 3 rows past when I stopped knitting the color loop. So there's a nice trap. And it's very handy to do that. It's invisible. And it just means that you just have a decision of whether or not you make a last stitch or you wait a few rows and then trap it. So it's nice to have that choice. Here is the end of my color loops, and let's see if I have my ruler. In inches, if you knit every row with sock yarn, It is often 1 foot to 1 inch, and it's not this time. It's 3.5 inches long, the whole motif. So I must have been doing bigger stitches. That's what I would guess. And it's true that going diagonally, the stitches sometimes are bigger. But it's nice to have that as a sort of a general idea of how much yarn you're going to use. If I were not knitting with the color loop every row, then that also would lengthen the motif. So in this design, every stitch is knit, but not in every design, right? So inside of the sock has the stitches showing diagonally. It makes it a nice single layer, lightweight vanilla sock, stretchy. So you could do this with horizontal stranding color work, of course, this motif, but it's still fun to do with vertical stranding and has its own benefits. So, okay, well, I've got this sock wrong side out after weaving in a few ends. I thought I would show you the wrong side out. I've got some ends that are woven in. I'm going to leave them a little bit long until I have a chance to give this a wash. But I thought I'd show you how beautiful these diamond patterns are from the back. I don't know if you can see the luminous color showing through the more dull gray, but it's just so beautiful like that, and almost William Morris or floral in its appearance. And then the ends of the loops end a little bit differently, different lengths, it doesn't matter, but very tidy. And the front of the sock is plain stockinette on the rest of the leg, but it has some ribbing in the back to snug up the ankle. I think that's going to be really beautiful and comfortable. And then the rest of the foot comes down, and then I started the short row toe, and it's sort of lying flat, but you can see just a little bubble right there where it's that extra space is there for the toe. And then I Kitchener stitched the two ends together. The heel is never going to lie flat. I mean, I suppose some washing and blocking you could, but as you can see, I did this on the CSM, so it doesn't have the twin stitches. It has just the wrapped short row effect that I get when I knit on the machine. But you can see the wedge is nice and centered, and on the foot it's going to come down at an angle right where the heel needs that room. So it'll lie flat if I squish the sock together, but if I try to straighten the sock out, this sock will never lie flat. It's a 3D sock, but it is going to fit really well. And when I put it folded, it can make it an odd shape, but it can lie flat like that. So I'm really happy with this not so vanilla sock, and I think that it's worth all the little extra steps to make a sock that's going to fit great and has some special color work. So I'll show it to you on the foot model too, of course.